In Chapter 8, we're focused on percents, and I'm going to teach lesson 8.1, 8.2, and 8.3 kind of together, so these videos really want to watch one right after another. We're going to start off by just relating decimals, fractions, and percents, remembering how to represent a number in those three different forms and how to convert between the three forms as well. And then we'll get into solving problems that deal with percents, whether we're finding the part, we're finding the whole, or we're finding the percent in each problem. So the lesson will be spread out over a couple of videos. We are covering 3 sections in the pre-algebra textbook. Copy down your targets for today then. So we're going to relate decimals, fractions, and percents, and we're going to find percents of a number. Whenever you're done writing that, let's move on to the notes. So what is a percent? All a percent is a ratio that compares a number to 100. Remember that a ratio is a ratio is really just a fraction, or you could also write it with the ratio dot. So we could say A to B or A over B. A ratio is just, a percent is just a ratio that compares a number to 100. So a percent is going to be a ratio where it's something out of 100. The denominator is 100. Okay? So if we have a ratio or a fraction and we wanted to convert it to the percent, we just really want to think about what's the equivalent ratio with the denominator of 100. When I look at this first fraction, 3/4, one way to get the percent would be to get the denominator to be 100. If you're starting with 3/4 and you want to end up with something out of 100, well, what would you do to 4 to get 100? You could multiply by 25. Well, as long as whatever you multiply the bottom by, you multiply the top by, this is really a fraction that's equivalent to 1. So as long as you multiply both the numerator and the denominator by the same number, you're not changing the fraction, just finding an equivalent form. These are similar ratios, remember that? So 3 times 25 is 75, 4 times 25 is 100. Once you have your ratio out of 100, this is 75%. Now sometimes it's not as easy to get a denominator of 100. When I think about 12 over 30, eventually I want to get to something out of 100. But 30, I can't multiply by an integer, by a whole number to get 100. Well, another thing you could do is think about reducing this fraction, get an equivalent ratio that's reduced. 12 over 30, I can actually take out 3, and when I take out 3, I'm left with 4 over 10. Now that's not out of 100, but now 4/10 I can easily get to 100 with the denominator. Remember, whatever you do to the top, you do to the bottom. So I would multiply the denominator by 10 to get 100. Then I have to multiply the top by 10 as well. So I would get 40 over 100, which is 40%. So one way you can get the percent from a ratio is to get a denominator of 100, and whatever you do to the bottom, do to the top. Now this doesn't always work with integers. You know, you might have a number like 30 that you can't get to 100 right away with using an integer. You have to use a decimal, and if that's the case, you have other options. So remember, to convert a fraction to a decimal, you could just divide the numerator by the denominator. And then to convert the decimal to a fraction, you could multiply it by 100. So if this little kind of shortcut doesn't work, you can always use these 2 steps. To convert a fraction to a decimal, divide the numerator by the denominator. Make sure you write that down. Just do the long division. And then when you're done, convert the decimal answer that you have to a percent by multiplying by 100. And multiplying by 100 is going to be the same thing as just moving the decimal 2 places to the right, making that number a little bit larger. So let's try this. In this next section, we're going to do a couple problems where I want you to find either the equivalent ratio, if I give you the percent, or find the equivalent percent if I give you the ratio. And we did mostly ratios up top, so I only have one more ratio in this example and then 3% examples. To convert the percent to a ratio, we'll write it as a fraction. 40%, remember, percent is always out of 100. Now let's just reduce it. You should always simplify your answer as far down as possible. So I can take out a 10 from both of these, and that's going to give me 4/10. Oh, but I can still take out more, so take out another 2, because they're both divisible by 2, and that gives me 2/5. 2/5 cannot be simplified farther, so 40% is the same as 2/5 as a ratio. Let's go on to B. Starting with the ratio, can you get the percent? So this would be one like I'm talking about, where up in the table, we could easily get a denominator of 100, but 8 is kind of difficult. You can't really get 8 to be 100 very easily. So what you could always do is take the numerator and divide it by the denominator. 5 divided by 8. Now the problem with that is 5 is smaller than 8, so let's put that decimal right here and add on a couple zeros to work with. Alright, so 5 divided by 8, we can't do that, but we can do 50 divided by 8. 50 divided by 8 is 6. 6 times 8 is 48. Do the subtraction. You get 2. Pull that 0 down. 8 goes into 20 twice. 2 times 8 is 16. Do the subtraction. You get 4. Pull this 0 down. And 8 goes into 40 5 times. That's going to give me 40. So we get a remainder of 0. Then my answer, remember that decimal slides right up from where it is. My answer right now is 625 thousandths, or 0.625, and you need to multiply that by 100. Multiplying by 100 is the same as just moving this decimal 2 places to the right. So my percent would be 62.5%. Remember, this method will always work. Alright, so I want you to try 2 more percent problems, starting with the percent, finding the ratios. This next one has a fraction in it, 87.5%. So if we wanted to make this a percent, remember a percent is always out of 100, right? So we would write it over 100. Now, this might look kind of funny, 87.5, a fraction within a fraction. If it makes you feel more comfortable, you can write it as a decimal. Remember, what is half represented in decimal form? Be 87.5, or 87 5/10 over 100. To get this to be a ratio, the first thing I would do is get rid of the decimal. What would you have to multiply by so that you cancel out the decimal and you end up only with a whole number? Well, if this is a half, I would multiply it by 2, and then whatever you do to the top, you do to the bottom, so that this becomes a whole number. Okay, we're moving away from the denominator of 100, but that's okay. Let's get it to be a whole number first. 87.5 times 2 is 175. 100 times 2 is 200. Now, reduce that fraction. You can't leave a decimal or a fraction within another fraction, okay? So know that that is not simplified. But now we can simplify this. What can we divide out of both of these? Well, you can reduce by 25. If you said 5, go a little higher. 25 is going to be better here. 4 25s make 100, plus 3 more 25s for the 75. So 4 and 3 would be 7 25s over 200 divided by 25 would be 8. 7/8 can't be reduced any farther. There's your ratio. And the last example, again, start with that percent out of 100. So we have 125 out of 100, and this can also be reduced by 25. So if you start with 5, that's okay. You'll end up having to reduce again by 5, like I did up here, divided by 10 and then divided by 2. But if you can get it all reduced at the beginning in one step, that's great too. So 125% is the same as 5/4. That's the same fraction, the same ratio, just in a reduced form. Okay, so we're going to move into solving some percent problems, and you have options here. There's 2 approaches to solving percent problems. You can either set up a proportion, or you could write an equation. If you set up a proportion, you're going to do it as the part over the whole is equal to the percent out of 100. You have 2 equivalent ratios. Percent is always out of 100, so the percent will always be over the 100, and then it's always the part over the whole. Now, the part does not have to be smaller than the whole. It could be, if your percent is over 100, it could be larger, so be careful with that. And then to help you with the word problems, you can also think of it as is over of. If I say 15 is 20% of another number, the is often signifying the part, and the of is often signifying the whole. So part over whole equals percent out of 100. Another option is to write an equation. I don't like this option as much, only because we sometimes forget to convert our percent to a decimal. You must do this. So maybe star that if you're going to do an equation. You can't put a percent, like 125%, you can't put that into your equation as 125. You would need to convert it to a decimal first, or move the decimal places to backwards now. So 125% would be the same as 1.25 as a decimal. This is what you'd have to put in your equation. So we'll do an example like this, but it's not my favorite. When you write an equation though, when you read the sentence, if you run into the word of, that signifies you to write multiply. And if you run into the word is, that means you're going to write equals. You're going to write an equation, okay? So I'm going to stop this video here. We're going to start in on the finding a percent and finding a part in the next video.